a watershed moment that will cause the most serious violation of international law. That's how UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has described Israel's plans to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. Members of the UN Security Council and the Arab League have been meeting to discuss Israel's move, which could be put into motion as soon as next week. Most of them were united in their opposition, with warnings that Israel's unilateral action could trigger a major escalation in the region.
If implemented, these steps could dramatically alter local dynamics, triggering instability across the occupied Palestinian territory and maybe beyond. This conflict has been marked by periods of extreme violence, but never before has the risk of escalation been accompanied by a political horizon so distant, an economic situation so fragile, and a region so volatile. It is crucial for all stakeholders to take action that will enable the parties to step back from the brink.
Well, opposition is also coming from Europe. More than 1,000 politicians have signed a letter urging their leaders to stop Israel. While on the ground in the occupied West Bank and Gaza, there have been renewed protests against the US-backed Israeli plans. The Palestinian foreign minister slammed the annexation plans and said that it would ruin any chance of peace in the region.
Annexation, whether partial or total, gradual or immediate, is the ultimate breach of the UN Charter and cannot go unchallenged. From a legal perspective, annexation is not only unlawful, it is a crime under the Rome Statute. From a political perspective, it will ruin the chances for Israeli, Palestinian, and regional peace. From a security perspective, it is utter nonsense, as it replaces internationally recognized borders that can be defended with a system of military control and subjugation that only fuels conflict and violence.
But Israel's ambassador to the UN refuted that claim.
The discussion over the extension of Israeli sovereignty to certain areas in Judea and Samaria does not stand in the way of peace. What stands in the way of peace is Palestinian rejectionism and the encouragement that they get from some in the international community. It is time that the Palestinians realize that rejectionism is a losing strategy.
Let's go live now to the UN in New York and our diplomatic editor, James Bay. So, almost universal opposition to Israel's plans at the Security Council. James, will that hold any sway with Israel?
Well, certainly it was very, very clear in the Security Council that it was 14 on the side of the UN Secretariat saying this is a violation of international law, and only 1 on the side of Israel. That, of course, was its close ally, the US. The problem for those that oppose this move that Israel is likely to do, we don't know it's definitely going to do it, is that all along Benjamin Netanyahu said this starts in July, he'll do it in July. Well, that is only 1 week from now, and it's really not clear what tools they've got to stop this. There are things the Palestinians can do. They can go to the International Court of Justice, they can go to the International Criminal Court, they can try and persuade individual countries to put sanctions on Israel, but it seems that they're things that really are not necessarily going to stop Israel. There are not that many tools that they have to actually stop this, although I think nearly everyone, other than the Israelis, agrees that this would be a breach of international law, because since these territories were gained by Israel in the 1967 war, they've been seen as occupied territories, and Israel would change that legal status if it was to annex them and then extend its sovereignty over them. That would be illegal under international law, Adrian.
All right. James, many thanks indeed. Al Jazeera's James Bay is there live at the UN in New York. Let's get the view now from West Jerusalem. Al Jazeera's Harry Fawcett is there.
A lot of the scrutiny here will be on exactly what is happening in the United States among senior US officials in Washington, D.C. They are meeting this week to discuss exactly how much and what will be green-lighted, if at all, in terms of the annexation. The signals certainly have been pretty positive, but there was talk from the US ambassador, Kelly Craft, During this meeting, she said that it took courageous Israeli leadership to make the hard choices required. So does that mean that they will require something of Benjamin Netanyahu in terms of acknowledging publicly that this is part of a Trump plan, which also, as part of it, contains a Palestinian state, something that might be harder for him to sell to his right-wing supporters here in Israel, and also talking about holding the Palestinian leadership accountable? Is that another attempt to try and get the Palestinians to hold talks and potentially stave off annexation, talks based on the Trump plan, which they have utterly rejected because of the annexation that it also includes in the huge loss of territory within the occupied West Bank that would result? I think it's very late in the day to try and make those sorts of appeals, although there are reports that they have been made through various channels to the Palestinian leadership. What is much more likely seems to be a coalescing of opinion around a limited, potentially to start with at least, a phased annexation.
Al Jazeera's Nida Ibrahim is in the Jordan Valley and has been speaking with the Palestinian Prime Minister's advisor about Israel's plans.
That rejectionism is what I'm going to be asking my guest, Mr. Ahmed Jamil Azam, who is the advisor for the Palestinian Prime Minister. We've heard Danon talk about Palestinians rejecting all these proposals offered to them. What do you say to that?
Actually, Mr. Danon mentioned a few international resolutions by the United Nations that mentioning that an Israeli state should started, but he didn't mention hundreds of resolutions for the United Nations about the end of the occupation, about establishing a Palestinian state, also about the regionalism. We didn't reject any opportunity. We were able and we are more than ready to start negotiations at this any moment if this is according to the international law and United Nations resolutions and to the agreed and signed agreements between us and Israel. We signed 9 agreements with Israel in security, economy, politics, and Israel breached all the 9 agreements. It's breached all what have been signed in Oslo and after Oslo.
Well, the US Secretary of State says that it's up to Israel to decide on annexation. For more on that, let's join Alan Fisher, who's live for us at the White House in Washington, D.C. What more did Mike Pompeo have to say, Alan?
Well, certainly we know that the Trump administration has laid out its plan for the Middle East. You'll remember that we had the Trump peace plan earlier this year, drawn up by Jared Kushner, who is the president's son-in-law, but also a senior advisor, someone who said he'd read more than 14 books on the Middle East as he was drawing up these plans. Well, Mike Pompeo had a news conference not far from here, about 3 kilometres from where I'm standing at the State Department. He said that it was up to Israel to make the decision, knowing that there has been a lot of speculation, knowing that there has been meetings here at the White House over the last few days about that exact topic. But he insisted it was much more important for the Palestinians to concentrate on that peace deal put forward by Donald Trump and his administration to improve the lot of their lives politically and also financially for their people.
I regret only that the Palestinian Authority has refused to participate in that. Right? They simply have rejected this out of hand. We simply ask that they come to the negotiating table based on what's outlined in the Vision for Peace, and they have chosen not to. They've chosen to threaten, to bluster, to assert that they're going to deny the ability to do security properly. That's not good for the Palestinian people.
The idea of annexation was certainly considered in the peace plan. By possibly announcing it in the next week, it appears as if the Israelis might be getting slightly ahead of what the Trump administration wanted. But we know that the Trump administration will support the Israelis. Benjamin Netanyahu has said that. That's why there have been the meetings this week. Donald Trump says he is the most pro-Israel president that the United States has ever had. You'll remember that he had his pre-election promise to move the US embassy to Jerusalem. He did that. He also recognised the annexation of the Golan Heights. And just a few hours ago, we spoke to Kellyanne Conway, a senior counsellor to Donald Trump, and asked if he was going to make an announcement sometime soon. All she said is that he will make an announcement, a big announcement, in the next few days. We know that Donald Trump likes to tout his ties to Israel. He believes it plays well, and with an election on November the 3rd, he would like to secure more of his base in believing that by helping Israel in these sort of circumstances, that appeals to evangelical Christian voters, someone who have been a key bloc in the Trump coalition.
Al Jazeera's Alan Fisher reporting live there from the White House in Washington. Many thanks indeed, Alan.